Right, so welcome. My name is Tyler Egan. I'm a college and career specialist with the Alaska Commission on Post-Secondary Education. Thank you for spending your Tuesday evening with us. I'm located here in Anchorage, so for any of the people who are viewing this are from Alaska, yes, you are speaking to someone who lives here and lives and breathes it every day. To go ahead and get started, here are going to be some of the topics that we're going to go over today. Including like Alaska Performance Scholarship, Alaska Education Grant, things that are actually relevant to living in Alaska, studying in Alaska, maybe leaving Alaska. So this is kind of just a quick snapshot. And as Derek has said, if you do have questions, please throw them in the Q&A. We will be monitoring that. We want to make sure that you get all the information that you need. But kind of jumping really quickly into it, post-secondary education, it's really anything beyond high school diploma or GED completion. It includes, going into apprenticeship programs, maybe the military. But for tonight's topics, we're going to be talking about if you're a college or university bound looking for a certificate, an associate's, a bachelor's degree. So when we do say post-secondary education from our agency standpoint, we really do mean anything beyond, high school and GED. But again, tonight we will be focusing on funding it for a post-secondary education within colleges and universities. But jumping right into it, there's going to be two kind of main families of costs that are going to be associated. And these you're going to find on institutional websites. These are going to be laid out in financial aid award letters. But the tuition, fees, room and board, those are going to be pretty set in stone. There's not going to be a whole lot of flexibility. Where these other costs, or they sometimes refer to them as indirect costs, there's a lot of flexibility, and there'll be a couple examples I'll show on the next slide, but the verbiage that you're going to find at any higher ed institution is cost of attendance. So if you were to Google, University of Idaho, University of Washington, University of Alaska Anchorage, and you throw in cost of attendance in there, it's going to bring you to a page that looks very similar to this. Now, I'm using Alaska Pacific University and the University of Alaska Anchorage, not because I'm based here in Anchorage, but because their cost of attendance is different, even though they're actually neighbors here in Anchorage. Like, they do share a border. Now, their tuition is going to be different because one is private, another one is public. They have different types of accommodations for your housing, so that's going to fluctuate differently. But again, those are going to be set in stone. But if we look at some of these smaller nuts and bolt pieces, the transportation between the two of them are fairly close. But when you start looking at personal miscellaneous, sometimes those are varying. But, these have all implications on how you determine how much money you're going to need to afford for your education. But not everyone is going to need a $2,000 or a $4,000 personal miscellaneous, item when it comes to actual pay that they're spending to go to their education. So this is a breakdown that, again, you're going to find at most institutions of higher ed, and they're going to have it separated to where you can see what everything is, and keeping in mind what's going to be kind of set in stone and what has some flexibility when it comes to making, those actual costs. But what is financial aid? There's a number of different avenues that all the funding is going to come into. We're going to talk about scholarships and grants because that is free money that you do not have to pay back. So we're big supporters of trying to access that free money. Going over work study and what that means while you're filing your FAFSA. Loans, it is a part of higher education and how people can afford their education. And it's important that we discuss those so people are aware of what they're getting into prior to accepting loans. But there's a number of funding sources that come from all over different places, and it's just good to look at them all. But again, we look at the free money first. We make sure people are aware of deadlines. We don't want anyone missing out on anything. Filing your FAFSA, comparing your schools. These are kind of the simplistic overview of what takes place over time. And this might happen for you within a matter of a week or 2 weeks. This might be a month-long journey, and that's okay. It's just a matter of making sure that you are checking off the boxes that you need to in order to get ready for going to, post-secondary education in 21-22. But it really starts off with the FAFSA, the acronym is Free Application for Federal Student Aid. We want to highlight the word free because there are websites out there that will be titled as FAFSA, but they will charge money. So if you are at a place that is asking for a credit card, a PayPal account, you are in the wrong location. It is a free website and it ends in .gov.gov. So make sure when you're going and looking that you're finding the right and appropriate one that does not cost any money. But it is used universally in Alaska as well as the lower 48 in Hawaii. Here at ACPE, we use it to determine whether or not someone is wanting to use the performance scholarship or the education grant. It opened up in October and it's going to remain open all the way through the 21-22 school year, but it's really important to file it sooner rather than later. You know, we do have sessions here at ACPE where we offer one-on-one appointments for the FAFSA as well as group appointments. So if you haven't filed your FAFSA, don't worry, I'll get into some options you have to contact us to assist you. But it is definitely the first step in the financial aid application process. And just to kind of give you a preview, this is what it looks like from a date perspective. So right now, hypothetically, you're a senior, it's October 2020. You're looking at going to school in 21-22. The tax information that you use from your parents is actually going to be from 2019, or your tax information is going to be from 2019. This can be a huge hiccup for people if they don't file their FAFSA in the fall and they wait until the spring, because it'll be spring of 21. Your parents or you may have filed your 2020 taxes and you're wanting to use that. So we kind of refer to using your prior year. So if you're looking at going to school in 21, you use your 2019, the prior taxes. But what is it used for? It's used for a lot of different things: federal aid, state aid, institutional aid. But right here, I'm really going to talk about scholarships, because there are a lot of scholarships that want to make sure students and families are accessing all different types of aid options out there. I worked with families here in Anchorage who've applied for a loan or applied for a scholarship, and they said, why do we want to file the FAFSA? We're not going to qualify for anything. And it was a $10,000 scholarship that was on the line with the family. And it was a requirement that they filed the FAFSA regardless of the outcome. So it is definitely in the benefit for families who are like, we're not going to earn anything. It is still good to get it done, because there are definitely some benefits to doing it. But to get started, you're going to create what's called your Federal Student Aid ID. This is going to be how you access the FAFSA process. This is how you electronically sign it. And it is linked to your Social Security number. So if you are creating your FSA ID or you already have, it's good to write that down in a sensitive place. It's, I know some people like to take screenshots with their phones. You can use whatever method you most feel comfortable with, but it's important because you will be using your FSA ID throughout your higher ed career and potentially even afterwards. There's a number of different things about it. Because it is linked to your Social Security number, it is linked to you as an individual. So if parents are needing to create an FSA ID as a part of the FAFSA process, they will need to have their own FSA ID. And so you can't be using shared family emails. We tell people, when you go to do your security questions, make sure that you're answering factual information. Alaskans love their ice cream, but depending upon the time of year, we might not. So using your favorite dessert as a challenge question isn't very good. Stick to things that are going to be factual. But what does the FSA ID do? Again, you're going to use it this year, potentially as a senior, to start your FAFSA process. You're going to use it every year you plan on going to school. And if you do take out loans through the federal government, you might be using that to access your loan lender. So this isn't just a quick one-off, I'm just going to create an account, it's okay. Once you verify the account with the Federal Student Aid Office, it is linked to you for life. And then the only way that you can, troubleshoot it is to troubleshoot the original one. There is no creating a new one. So we do want to highlight to people, again, that you will be using this quite often. So it's good to write down all of your information. This is what the website looks like, just to kind of, again, highlight the free, FAFSA process ending in .gov, just to kind of give people a preview of what it looks like. It did get updated within the last year or two. And there are definitely a lot of different ways you can file the FAFSA. We strongly recommend that you do it online for the reasons that are listed on the slide, but simply because if you ever need to make a correction, if you want to add or drop a school, it is a living, breathing document that you get the ability to go back and update. There is the phone app that came out last year. There were some complications last year. I haven't heard of anything negative this year. So if you're more of a mobile app person, there's that avenue. You still can file the FAFSA by paper. That's how it historically used to be done. But living up here in Alaska, it takes several days or weeks for us to get our additional mail. So again, you can do it by mail, but if there is an error or if you want to make a correction or change and you're trying to do it by paper, it's just going to take more time. But here are kind of some of the steps that take place, you know, and again, I've had students walk into the Diamond Center here in Anchorage and they think it's a one-page application, but there actually is numerous steps in this where you actually have to log in and sign. And here are kind of some of the chapters that you're going to be dealing with. And it does start off with students doing their information first, selecting their schools, and then based upon the dependency status, it's very common, at least 90% of students who file the FAFSA for the first time are listed as a dependent student where they would need to provide parent information. So it's very common that students I work with get roadblocked there. Don't be concerned because there is a save key option and you will be able to come back to the document. However, if parent information is needed, sometimes it's best that while you're filing this FAFSA, you already have your parent there with you, just because you're going to be needing a lot of their sensitive information, such as social security numbers, their tax information, how much they have in their checking account. But more importantly, you're going to need to help guide them, or your parents might be helping guide you through what's called, the federal student aid ID process. My biggest recommendation: create the student ID first, then go in and create the parent ID, then actually start the FAFSA process. It's a much streamlined approach if you do that rather than having to do any backtracking. So as I was mentioning, most students are going to be listed as a dependent student. A lot of students think, hey, I'm a senior now, next year I'm going to go to the college. I'm going to be living on my own, not under my parents' house. However, that is not a reason that the Federal Student Aid Office is deemed to make you independent. So there is a number of checklist options right here to where if you're able to answer yes to any of them, you would be listed as a independent student and wouldn't need to provide parent information. But most commonly, you need to be 24, be married, have children, go in the military, as well as some other ones regarding homelessness, foster care. But again, a majority of students will be listing parent information while they file their FAFSA. One really cool feature about filing the FAFSA online is the IRS data retrieval tool, to where it'll automatically import over a lot of your taxes and your parents' taxes. It is a very smooth transitional process where you're not having to look up the taxes and have a separate calculator to calculate it all out. There will be sections that will be necessary for you to have your actual physical copies of your IRS tax, your 1040, essentially, your tax return. But 30% or roughly 30% of students get flagged for what's called tax verification. And that's where the federal government tells colleges and universities, hey, you need to audit 30% of your students and make sure what they're entering is actually fact, because we don't want anyone putting in incorrect information that might give them access to higher awards. So for students who think, oh, I'm just gonna enter all this in here, you get flagged for verification. They will actually want the IRS copy of your transcript. It's not the one that you got in the mail or your parents got in the mail. It'll have the actual IRS letterhead, and there is a process for that. If you do pull it from the IRS data retrieval tool and you get flagged for verification, it's a much simpler process to work with the financial aid office. And this also is a barrier for students receiving their aid, where they have to say, hey, I filed my FAFSA, I showed up to the college, where's my aid? Sometimes this needs to be completed in the months or weeks before you actually start school. But another cool feature of it being online is you find out almost instantaneously what this means for you completing your FAFSA. And so there's the signature page, and you will not be able to sign the electronic copy unless you've completed your Federal Student Aid ID, your FSA ID. But it generates the expected family contribution. And this is the number that all the colleges will use, and they all use it a little bit differently. But the federal government will say if you're eligible for a Pell Grant, the institution will say, are you eligible for the supplemental grant? Alaska Commission on Post-Secondary Education, the agency I work for, we determine if you're eligible for the Alaska Education Grant, but we all use that number a little bit differently. And I've kind of highlighted in here where that is found. It actually is a drop-down menu, so when you push that button, it's going to tell you instantaneously what you qualify for on a federal level with regards to grants, as well as the loan option. So rather than having to mail it off, wait in weeks in anticipation, you find out almost instantaneously what some of your funding sources might be. This is the student aid report, and again, this is also sent to all the universities and colleges that you've put on there. You can put up to 10. We do recommend that you put up, at least 2 or 3 just to keep your options open. And I will say it's the expected family contribution. It might not be the actual family contribution, but this is the methodology that the Federal Student Aid Office has determined to identify what might be possible for the family to help contribute that. There are ways to help appeal and navigate that, and I will go into that a little bit later. But it's pretty hard. It is a pretty difficult process if you don't have the proper paperwork to do so. So what happens next? People file their FAFSA, it gets sent off to the school, agencies like ACPE receives it, and then it's gonna trigger financial aid award letters. But I do wanna point out real quick that the only way that a lot of schools will trigger the financial aid award letter is if you've also applied to the school. So simply just because you've put in, a school on your FAFSA form, they might not be in contact with you until you've actually completed the application process. My strong recommendation is that there's no correct way of filing the FAFSA first or the application first, but they do need to be a 1-2 punch that as you are completing your FAFSA or doing your applications, that you're completing the other step as well. Because what you really want to do is be able to compare schools. You might look at the federal aid options, and that's where it definitely shows where the out-of-state school might be more expensive, but they might knock more off. Additionally, if you have questions about the type of aid you're receiving, you have more time to figure out, okay, are there other options out there or things that I may have missed? But ultimately, communicating with federal student aid, communicating with ACPE, your colleges, financial aid offices, you definitely want to be able to do that. And it'd be really great if when you do all of your applications, you do the FAFSA, that you're also getting this award letter from all the different schools you're interested in, so you can actually compare the nuts and bolts. So this is just an example that we've created. It is not universal to every college and university, but the idea is it's going to have that, first off, that top part, the cost of attendance, where I went over a little bit over. It's going to show you what type of aid that the institution is expecting for you to receive, both from a federal level, state level, and institutional level. It's also going to include your federal loans. I'll get into that later, as well as your work study. But this is kind of where you actually get to figure out, okay, based upon what this cost of attendance was, how much aid I'm receiving, is there going to be any out-of-pocket expenses, or am I going to have to take out a loan? And if I need to take out a loan, what does that all look like? Now, I throw this up here because it is a very unprecedented time right now in our history as well as the globe. This is kind of the way that institutions can alter your FAFSA to make it seem more accurate to what the current situation of you and your family might be. So again, going back to you being a senior right now in October of 2020, you're looking at school a year away from now in 21, 22, using tax information from 2019. This is an appeals process essentially for students to say, hey, my family had all this income in 2019. Right now in 2020, my parents have been laid off. There's been some unfortunate circumstances in our family. Our finances are not what they used to be, and it doesn't really reflect who we are today. You can file this form. It's the special circumstances for professional judgment. It's an aid adjustment, an income override, a financial aid appeal. They all call it a little bit different, but this is what the Federal Student Aid Office calls it. So if you do have questions regarding your FAFSA and the EFC, and there's some of these, again, every institution is going to be a little bit different, but these are the very common reasons people will file it. They can alter your EFC. Now, the Department of Education from the feds won't do it. Me at ACPE, I can't do it. your actual institutional's financial aid office. So hypothetically, you're applying to Arizona State, Idaho State, Oregon State, you would have to do all the appeals through those 3 different financial aid offices. I'm able to assist you. I'm able to walk you through the process, but I'm also going to reference that you actually contact them specifically because they're the ones that are going to approve this override. I have no ability to do so. But again, you're sitting there, you're trying to gather in all the information, and eventually you're going to have to make decisions on where you go to school, whether you can afford it or not afford it. But also, times happen where people sometimes get short-sighted because, oh, I'm getting all this scholarship money as a high school senior getting ready to go into college. Well, is that money going to be there the following year or all 4 years? Tuition does increase from year to year. So you might be able to go afford out of state the first year, but you might have to move back home the second year simply because you can, afford it. If you knew that ahead of time, would you not have left, or would you have chose a different college out of state? So that's kind of, again, sitting down and having that honest discussion with you. Are you ready to take out loans? Are you ready to look at other options? Are you going to take a gap year? Again, this is why you want to file your FAFSA and do your applications, get the financial aid award letter, and have the honest conversation with yourself. So jumping into what some of these financial aid programs are, the first one we want to point out, grants, again, free money that you don't have to pay back. The Pell Grant is triggered based upon your EFC from your FAFSA. This will be used at all the schools that you list on your FAFSA. So if you include UAA and you include University of California, LA, it's going to go both places. It's only going to go to where you go, but it is up to $6,345. The next grant from the federal government is actually dispersed through the colleges themselves, and it's called the FSEOG grant. I know here in Alaska, sometimes they'll title it as the university or the UAA grant or the UAF grant. But the idea around this is the federal government gives colleges nationwide money to determine who they want to give it to. They could give $100 to 1,000 people. They could give 1,000 people $100. It's completely up to them. I would say look at this grant money as Halloween candy money. The earlier you go on the night, the bowl is bigger. There's a lot more options and a lot more flexibility. And that's why it's important to file your FAFSAs sooner rather than later, because as people roll into spring and early summer thinking, oh, I'm going to file my FAFSA, some of this FSEOG money may already be dictated or allocated to other students. The Pell Grant still might be there, but some of these other grants kind of tend to dry up. Here in Alaska, back in 2011, we created the Alaska Education Grant. We utilize your FAFSA. The application for this in-state grant is the FAFSA, application. One thing I always tell students is include an Alaska school on your FAFSA, even if you plan on going out of state, simply because I can't tell you what's going to happen in a week from now, a month from now, or a year from now. And it's nice to already have some of these backup plans laid out just in case. It is up to $4,000 a year, and you can get it renewed every year. But it is based upon the financial need of the individuals and when they apply. So again, the earlier you apply, the better. The Alaska Performance Scholarship, and I get a lot of questions about this. This is completely different than the UA Scholars. The UA Scholars was developed for the top 10% of a graduating class to go to a University of Alaska college. The Performance Scholarship is given to any high school graduate of Alaska within the last 6 years that meets the requirements as well as studies in state. Now, there are some requirements where you have to have a certain GPA, have curriculum, have test scores, but our application for it is the FAFSA, which is another reason to include an Alaska school on your FAFSA if you plan on going out of state. Hopefully this slide isn't new to you, and if it is available on our website. But this is the breakdown of the 3 different levels that you can get. And again, we will be using whatever the lowest of the requirements are. So if you do get like a 3.1, but your ACT is a 21, you're going to be defaulted down to level 3. But this is a 4-year award. So when you start looking at the level 3 amount, even though it's $23.78 for 1 year, it's a 4-year award. So it's almost 10 grand. But I do want to point out, you do need to get your GPA taken care of before you graduate. You do need to get your testing requirement done before you graduate, as well as the curriculum, because once it's locked in forever. You will see on here that we also have a work keys option that's separated from the SAT or ACT. That's provided through the Job Center or sometimes through your high school. It is a different test. If you do go that route, it will only be good for a 1-year or a certificate program. So we strongly recommend you try for the SAT or ACT score. We will utilize your super score if you do take the test multiple times. So we do want to point that out, that there is some benefit if you have the ability to take it multiple times. It might increase your score and might be able to help you move up from like a level 2 to a level 1.
Tyler, quick question. Because of the new, because of the COVID, and a lot of universities are going ACT, SAT optional, what is the state of Alaska doing to address those concerns or those issues for students who, because of COVID, are not able to take the ACT or the SAT because of...
Yeah, and that's a great question. Now, for anyone who's monitoring it kind of earlier in the springtime of 2020, the state of Alaska, the governor's office did waive the testing requirements for the class of 2020. However, that, to my knowledge, has not been determined for the class of 21. As a result, I am, telling everyone, take the test scores if you can. I do know that testing centers in Alaska do vary from community to community, school district to school district. So, it's something to keep aware of, but we are at this point telling everyone that the class of 21 will not have it waived unless we hear otherwise. So plan on taking the test. And I've also heard it brings up another good point. I've worked with families that say, well, I'm looking at this college, it doesn't require the SAT or ACT, I'm just not gonna take it. And I'll get into the APS a little bit later, but you can use it in a greater window. So if you do return to the state, it's good to have already taken it. Because again, if you don't take it while you're in high school, it's not going to count for any type of eligibility requirements for the APS. There are 2 different tracks, one being math and science, the other being social studies and language. It doesn't matter which track you complete. You can go the math and science route, and then once you graduate, you can use the funding to go into English. You could go into nursing. Like, you're not stuck within those tracks. You just need to meet one of them before you graduate. And you will realize that this screen is very vague. And the reason that is Alaska is so unique that every school district offers different classes or a different amount of classes. So if you have questions, if you're on track to graduate, that might be a different list of requirements for the performance scholarship. So talk to your counselor sooner rather than later, because it's really sad when seniors see this slide and they're going to be a half a credit short of math in the spring semester of their senior year, to where there's no way to make that up. So get your ducks in a row before your last semester and make sure you're going to get all the classes needed to get this requirement met. But as I mentioned earlier, this is like one of the greatest features about the performance scholarship is you have 4 years of funding in a 6-year window. You can take a gap year, you could go out of state and return, you could get your bachelor's out of state and then come back for your master's and still be able to utilize the funding as long as it's in a 6-year window. There will be some eligibility requirements that you have to meet once you start the process. Your first year, you need 24 credits as well as a 2.0 GPA. After that, you need to bump it up to a 30 credits a year requirement as well as a 2.5 GPA. The reason that is it's very common in all of the Alaska schools that you're going to need 120 credits in order to graduate. If you only take 24 a year, it's going to take you 5 years of school and your funding is going to run out. If you take 30 credits, you're on course to graduate in 4 years, which is what we're trying to get people to do. If you don't graduate in 4 years, it's not a problem other than you're going to lose out on APS funding. Because again, going back to this slide, you only get 4 years of funding. And yeah, as I mentioned earlier, you get your bachelor's out of state, you want to come back to school, you can use it as a grad student. You will not be able to stack any of these years on top of each other. And think of it also as 8 disbursements. You have 8 semesters worth of funding. You can't stack 2 on top of each other. It is used by the individual basis. Additionally, if you decide to take half-time status, you drop down to 9 credits or 6 credits, that counts as a disbursement. So it's really in your best interest to maintain on-time enrollment. Scholarships. There are a number of scholarships that are out there within school districts, Native organizations, utility companies, and that process is never ending. And if you haven't started looking at scholarships, definitely now is the time, because there may be deadlines that are coming up, November 1st, December 1st, that you don't want to miss out on any type of funding. Now, here's a number of websites that you're going to see. The first one that I'm going to mention is akcis.org, and that is actually our institution or our agency's website that we monitor. It's used in a lot of classrooms, so some of you might be familiar with it, but it is, number one, 100% free. There is 3,000 scholarships on there, 800 of which are based in Alaska. And also, we're not going to sell your information. Now, there's also some real, interesting funding sources through FastWeb and College Board. If you do decide to go that route of looking at some of these other places, I strongly recommend that you create a second email account, first name, last name, scholarships@gmail.com. That way, when you're done with your scholarship search, all of that information is left over there, because they will sell your personal information for demographic reasons. You're going to get a lot of spam and junk messages, and it's nice to kind of already have that filtered out in a completely separate email. If you do go that route of having a second email, I recommend, if you have a smartphone, get an app set up with that, so then that way you do get notifications for when scholarship information comes up, or if a scholarship search committee has additional questions or multiple phases to their process, you still don't want to miss out on that. Now, federal work study. There will be a question on the FAFSA. Are you interested in federal work study? Yes, no, don't know. And we tell everybody always check yes. And the reason why is you will not know whether or not you qualify for federal work study until the very end of your FAFSA process. Now, it's possible you may qualify, you may not qualify, and you can go back in later and answer the question, but there's nothing that hurts you if you answer yes and don't qualify. Now, federal work study jobs allow students to both work and study simultaneously. You might get hired by the college based upon being eligible for this. You could be in charge of a computer lab to where the printer runs out of paper or ink, you get off of your workstation, you go fix it, you come back to your studying. A non-work study job on a college campus might be washing dishes, being a lifeguard, being a parking attendant. There's a number of them. But the federal work study jobs, definitely are going to be allowing you to be a better student. If you don't qualify for federal work study, don't worry. There is a number of college jobs on your campus that are going to help pay for classes, but also work around your schedule. I made my bread and butter during my undergrad working non-federal work study jobs to where I didn't, it was in between my classes. I didn't have to drive around town. And they definitely worked around my schedule to where I got more hours during breaks. I didn't have to negotiate that. It was kind of already there. So, there are placements that you can get for both federal work study and and federal non-work study. But definitely look at all those options as you're looking at, your employment on campus, and if you do need to work and go to school at the same time. Now, we're going to talk loans here, and there's a couple of different things that come with loans. You're going to see it from the federal level, you're going to see it from the state level, you're going to see it through banks and other private lenders. And this is where kind of the nuts and bolts of things kind of start to take place for people. And this is the very first kind of phase of the introduction to loans and how this impacts you. I graduated in 2008 from my college, and all of us thought we were going to get jobs and pay off our loans. Lo and behold, the recession hit, and that was kind of a huge financial mess for a lot of myself and my cohort members from graduating. So this is where, if you are looking at loans, let's get into some of them. The federal direct loan is commonly referred to as the Stafford loan. Anyone who is 18 most likely doesn't have a credit score or hasn't defaulted on credit, so they're automatically going to get this. So for everyone filing their FAFSA, you're going to see that, congratulations, you got the federal direct loan. There's a couple of perks to this one that kind of makes this the #1 loan option if you do need to go to school. Number one, it's usually the lowest interest rate. There might be options such as an income-based repayment plan when you graduate, or forgiveness options due to public service. There's both subsidized and unsubsidized loans to where the government might pay your interest while you're in school. So freshman year, you qualify for a direct loan that's subsidized. That $1,000 freshman year will stay at $1,000 up until 6 months after you leave school. So that's kind of in your best interest to look at that one, because you're not going to find a lot of loan options that offer that type of perks or benefits. Now, some of it might be unsubsidized, to where, again, the moment you start taking out the loan, the interest rate is going to be tacked on there. But again, this federal direct loan is going to be the lowest rate. This year it's at 2.75, which is a very historic low. So if you do need to take out a loan, this would be the first option that you should consider. Now, there is different amounts to it, and it does increase over time. So the longer you go to school, there might be more expensive classes that, whether it is lab fees or equipment or books get more expensive. This is kind of slowly adjusting for that. And there are limits to what can be subsidized and unsubsidized. But there is some, increases in amounts. There is a maximum amount of what you can take over the lifetime of your studies. But most students are looking at kind of completing school within a 4 or 5 year window. There is the federal direct plus loan for parents to take out for the students through the federal government. Again, the parent would be taking it out for the student. There is a fixed interest rate. There is credit score requirements. And there is a threshold of what the amount is that you can take. This is usually, when we're sitting there talking about the, parent plus loan, I've promised my child that I would help them afford their education. This is a common route that gets taken to help do that. Now, even if you are a parent in this session, or you're a student who is looking at completing an education beyond a bachelor's degree, it's also going to continue to get more expensive the longer you go to school. And the federal government does allow for graduate students and professional students to have access to funding. This is kind of my story. Is I didn't file the FAFSA when I went to college. I was told, we're not going to qualify for anything. My sister was 1 year ahead of me. She didn't qualify. So I did all 4 years of undergrad, paying out of pocket and taking out loans through my bank. But when I went to grad school, I didn't file my FAFSA because I was always told, don't file your FAFSA, you're not going to get anything. And I took out my loan through my bank at 13%, where at the time the federal government was offering it at a 6.5%. So I was paying twice as much in interest, simply because I didn't understand that when you go to a master's program, a doctoral program, or continuing just your education beyond your bachelor's, you can also get access to this federal grant or this federal loan money. Now here at ACPE, we do offer loans for Alaska residents as well as people visiting and studying in Alaska. There are some requirements that need to be taken place, but we do understand that, especially if you are looking at going out of state, the cost of attendance as a non-resident, it can be quite high. So we do offer the supplemental education loan. There are different award amounts, but we do understand that it's in the title. It is supplemental because the first route you should be taking, and I can't make this clear enough, would be taking advantage of the federal loan simply because it's going to give you a lower interest rate as well as some other perks. But if you do need to consider another loan to take out for your education, this is one of them. Now, there are some credit score requirements where you would need someone to be your co-signer on it. However, we do give, like right now because of COVID, we're giving forbearance options where people are not having to make payments on their accounts, or we're adjusting their payments simply because they're unable to make the full payment. Now, this is something that we can offer. There's a lot of other private lenders and banks that may be giving this benefit, or they might not, but like we are in here by state statute to give this benefit. Additionally, if you are looking at a trade or vocational school that is not a Title IV school that's not found on the FAFSA, we do allow for funding to be used for in-state studies for that, up to $10,000. So I do want to point that out. Similar to the federal loan, we also have a family education loan, and this isn't just limited to the parent. It could be a step parent, foster parent, grandparent. You know, there's multiple avenues for this person to take that. Again, if a family member said, I'm willing to help out, this might be an option to consider. Here in Alaska, we love our fish and we love our seafood. The Wynn Brindle Memorial Educational Loan is given for students in the listed related fields that if you are trying to afford another affordable way, or find an affordable way to pay for your education, this loan option might be for you. Again, no interest rate while you're in school, 5% interest rate fixed when you graduate, but you also might get a lot of it forgiven. Now, there is some other federal options as well as employer options, but this one is definitely one that the state focuses really heavy on, simply because fishing is definitely a lifeline for a lot of communities, and we want to keep people in those industries. Now, I have this slide listed as ACPE loans, and the reason that is simply because it really stems down to your Alaska residency. You get a perk with a lot of our Alaska loans simply because you're an Alaskan resident, and you can do a lot of things to jeopardize that. I have them listed here, the most common one definitely being voting, getting your driver's license in another state. And if you do that, it's going to jeopardize your loan. It's also going to jeopardize your hunting fishing license, your permanent fund dividend. And I hear the stories where a student says, I want to go to school in Washington. I'm going to move to Washington, get my driver's license, get an apartment, and I'm automatically going to become a resident. Well, by the state of Washington, yeah, they might say you're a Washington resident, but the University of Washington, Washington State, Western, they're all going to want you to have been a resident in that state for at least 12 months and not going to school. So then you kind of get put in this limbo status to where you're no longer an Alaskan resident, you're now a Washington resident, but you don't get the perks from the tuition break of it. So if you do go to school out of state and you are walking around the college campus, be very hesitant to sign anything without reading the fine print, simply because you don't want to have to lose any of these residency perks. Additionally, just FYI, it's listed on the PFD website. If you are looking at going out of state, there are some appeals that you can make with regards to still receiving your PFD while you're out of state. But I'm going to 100% say if you have questions about that, go to the PFD website. It does allow you to study out of state for a certain amount of months at one point and still get your PFD, but it comes through their agency, not ours. Repayment of loans, it's pretty standard. Your student loans are going to give you a 6-month grace period after you leave school. Now, this is whether you graduate or just decide to take a break. After 6 months, you're going to need to start making payments, whether it's state, federal, or, and this is the other thing. Some private lenders, they're going to want payment right away, even if you are a student and in school. But for the Parent Plus loan, for our family education loan, for parents and family members, that's usually a 60-day window. It's pretty common that you have 10 years to repay it. Now, there are various repayment and relief options to where if you're not making the income that you thought you were, you're gonna need to make a lower payment. Agencies can work with you, and it's definitely in your best interest to communicate, because we're really trying to avoid you going into default. You can, if you fail to make payments over a certain amount of months, whether it's 6, 9 or 12 months, it's going to be listed in your terms and conditions. And it's definitely good for you to know, because they could take away your PFD. They could take your wages directly out of your paycheck. It could have some implications on your credit score and how you get a car, get a house, potentially get a job. At any point, at any time in your life, whether it's for a loan with your education or any loan in general, call your loan lender if you have difficult making payments. They will work with you, or they're more likely to work with you earlier on when you're seeing that it's a problem, rather than waiting until you've avoided it and now it's, you know, having real life consequences on your life or your education. Real quick, I want to talk about some of the other access programs. I'll get into WUI definitely more in depth. If you're looking at graduate school and, you know, there's a program that's not found here in Alaska, the Western Regional Graduate Program is going to be for you. Same with the Professional Student Exchange Program loan. If you're looking at going to like being a pharmacist, a dentist, an optometrist, that's going to be for you. And even the WWAMI program is if you want to go into medical school. Alaska, Wyoming, Montana, Idaho, like we're all together in it and trying to get people that access to a medical program. But the most common one that I work with people on is definitely the WUI program, the Western Undergrad Exchange. Alaska works with all these other great states to identify other places for people to continue their education. It is going to primarily be public institutions. I don't think I've found a private one on there. I might be wrong. And not all state institutions will actually participate in it. But the biggest kicker with it is the in-state tuition break. Now, I'm going to use Washington State and Pullman just because it's kind of an easy math one. They've identified that their in-state tuition is roughly $10,000. The non-resident rate is $25,000. And so when you look at being a WUI participant, it's 15. It's that 10 as a resident plus 50%, it gets you to 15. The other way to look at it is if they're charging you $25,000 for tuition and you go to their scholarship website, it's going to list the WUI program as a scholarship of $10,000. It doesn't matter the way you cut the math, it's $10,000 a year, at least for that one school. The amounts will vary from school to school. Sometimes it's higher, sometimes it's lower. But if it's $10,000 for 1 year, you're looking at $40,000 over the course of your 4-year career. That is a nice new vehicle or a very nice used vehicle. So it's definitely worth your effort when you are filing applications to see if there's a checkbox for you to be considered a WUI participant. Now, if you go to the WUI website, that would be my #1 place to recommend because you're going to find what schools participate, but also what programs participate. Not every school is going to have every program on there. For example, nursing is a high demand field. They're trying to keep their in-state residents going through the nursing programs. So as a result, you might not be able to study nursing in Oregon or California. So definitely check out that website. There's other ways for people to save money. Some of it's while you're in high school taking, advanced placements, you're taking, getting scholarships done. The biggest one that I see that students struggle with regards to saving or lowering their educational costs is simply just graduating within a 4-year window, which is kind of that middle one, maintaining on-time enrollment of roughly 15 credits a semester to get within that window to finish in a 4-year. I say this because if you're an Alaskan resident, you're using the performance scholarship, it's not there your 5th year. If you're taking that 5th year, it's another year of tuition, books, housing, meal plan. And that's also delaying how fast you can enter the workforce and your career ladder might change. So that's definitely the #1 way I'd recommend that you can save money is pass your classes, and graduate within 4 years. Test prep. This is another common one. Now, SAT and ACT are used by a lot of schools to determine what class you're going to get placed in for your math, your English, your science, a number of different ones, writing. You might have to take the AccuPlacer or the ALEX test, but if you test poorly, they might have you take a preparatory class that's not going to count for any type of credits towards graduation. That's also going to delay you or make it more difficult for you to graduate within a 4-year window. So I recommend that if you are looking at going back to school, or if you're like, I can move my test score up a little, but this might actually save you some money down the road. Where can you get more information? So we're located here in Anchorage in the Success Center is in the Diamond Mall next to the Perfect Cup in the movie theater. Right now, however, we're all operating via telework or from home. So like I'm in Midtown Anchorage, but we have our website up, ACPE.Alaska.gov. If you go to the Success Center page, I've included it in here. We offer services both over Zoom, which is the platform we are using tonight, as well as by email and telephone. There's a number of information you can find, again, through akcis.org, doing like a financial aid sort. Every Wednesday at FAFSA Time Alaska's Facebook page, we're doing FAFSA completions. So there's a number of avenues for you to get more information. Real quick, this is what the financial aid sort option looks like for your AKCIS profile. So again, if you haven't looked at it, I strongly recommend it. Is 100% free. Anyone can use it. If there's parents in the room and they have questions, they can use it as well. But if you do have a login previously, we can reset that, or it's possible your high school counselor already has a login for this, and you can get that. We also have our blog where we comment on everything post-secondary, so not just strictly college and university, but the trades, apprenticeships, considering the military. Last week we were talking about where you include your PFD on your FAFSA. So there is a number of information on there as well. At this time, I've been talking for quite a while. I do realize we're nearing kind of the end of our time, but I do want to say, if you have any questions about any of these slides, please throw them up in the Q&A and I will make sure to have them answered. If they don't get answered tonight, again, this is my contact information. You can schedule appointments through our website. You can ask questions on our Facebook page. We just want to make sure you have all the information you need to be successful.
Exactly. Thank you so much, Tyler. You did an amazing job. The floor is open for any questions. We still have a few minutes remaining. Not that many, but we have a few minutes remaining. Any questions? Oh, fantastic. Well, Tyler, if you have one last takeaway for our audience tonight, what would that be?
I think the big one, the Alaska Performance Scholarship. When I went to college back in 2004 to 2008, I didn't have access to the Performance Scholarship. It wasn't created then. And the cost of attendance nationwide, not just in Alaska, has gone up exponentially to where my undergrad tuition rate is now doubled in 15 years.
Yes.
This Performance Scholarship, if you do decide to stay in state, is a huge game changer. So I meet with a lot of families who don't file FAFSAs, who don't take test scores, or they don't achieve the scores they want, and they just kind of let it go. And they don't realize that it's a scholarship with 4 years of funding in a 6-year window. And you don't have to use it, but it's important to make sure you're eligible for it before you graduate. If you don't file your FAFSA on time, you still might get access to funding. I work with families who go fishing in the summer. They get back from fish camp. They're back at internet access and they file their FAFSA late. They still do sometimes get that funding, but if they don't get it all taken care of before you graduate, there's nothing I can do to fix it. There's no appeals process. It's kind of set in stone.
Yeah, fantastic.